The Solitaire Series, Episode 9, The Five of Clubs, by Troy Lambert. Narrated by Troy Lambert. Fredrick leaned against the wall outside and took a deep drag on his cigarette. He couldn't smoke in the club. Those days were long gone. Two men had come into the club last night. One guy, Ace called Jack, was all scarred up on his right side. The other, he learned later, was named Burt. Big black dude, red top hat, red suit, and sporting a gorgeous pair of Oxfords. He'd met them at what started out as his side gig, then became his primary one. Well, sort of. Fredrick didn't like his job. That was in part because it was actually two jobs, and the challenge of balancing the needs of each weighed on him. Coming out of high school, he'd found himself one of the most desired linemen in the NFL draft, got picked up by the Rams in the 10th round, signed a fat contract, and was on the way to living his dream. The pressure was immense. Almost every NFL player had some kind of vice, one that enabled them to let off steam, fight boredom in the off-season, and motivate them to more frequent and harder workouts. Some guys got more tattoos, some drank, and others turned to drugs. For some, fast cars and women were enough. For Fredrick, gambling kept him going. His game of choice was blackjack, and it took him a little too long to figure out that the big winners were pros. Most of them counted cards and actually gambled for a living, riding a roller coaster of big losses and big gains, but always increasing their stake. Still, he always believed the next hand would make him the big winner, and before long he found himself addicted, and surprisingly to some, in debt. At first he managed his vice well, and it didn't affect his play. Gradually, he couldn't do it anymore. His coaches and teammates tried to help, but he blew them off. He borrowed money, sold things he should have kept, and all the while his debt grew. Occasionally he would manage to pay it off, but then his losses would feed it like a junkie on Friday night. He started missing workouts and then practices. Before he knew it, his coaches decided that he would be injured in a game and released. They even picked the goddamn play. Turned out he was a good actor and left the game with no disgrace to himself and, more importantly, to his coaches. No disgrace to the team or the league. He took a gig as a bouncer working for Ace at this club. Pretty soon he learned about the backroom games where the real money was made, and his size, cunning, and his innate ability to talk drunks into leaving peaceably earned him rapid promotions until he was Ace's right-hand man. He never gambled here. You don't shit where you eat, his grandfather, one generation removed from the slavery of a South Carolina cotton plantation, told him. Fredrick's father was half white, the result of his grandfather's affair with a white woman from West Virginia, far enough from where he ate, so to speak. The tryst had turned into a marriage, one that lasted neither 60 years, until the cancer came for his grandmother and took her away over the course of a 6-month battle as fierce as she was. In the end, she lost. No, when Fredrick did gamble, which he often did, he avoided the casinos and games run by Blackjack, his employer's less than legitimate company. Instead, he tried to find places that were neutral and tried to keep his debts to a minimum. But it was hard to know who owned what location and who was running what game. Inevitably, he found himself in debt again, this time to a group known as Solitaire, Ace's main competitor. And as gamblers are often wont to do, he made a deal for himself. The first few months of his double job, he paid off his debt using information. After that, his industrial spying, for that's what it was if he was honest with himself, earned him a certain amount of credit with Solitaire, all based on how good the information he passed along was. So he looked for valuable information wherever possible, even though he lost most of what he earned, at least at first. Lately, things had started to turn around for him. After the years of play, he started to understand the game better and pay more attention to detail. He learned a fairly easy system of counting cards, one that improved his odds significantly. His job had also helped him gain some self-discipline. Instead of gambling all his winnings away, he started to save them, hoping one day he could get out of Vegas, head someplace more pleasant to live, and where he wasn't beholden to anyone. The more valuable information he gave up, the larger his stake became, and that increased the odds his dream would become a reality. Of course, he had to be careful about winning too much. Nothing was more suspicious than someone unlucky who had a sudden turnaround in luck. While the two men talked to Ace, Fredrick listened, When they left, he made a phone call that resulted in a request for his presence. When his shift was over, he left the club and headed downtown in his aging Kia, bypassing the valet service and parking in the lot outside the casino on his own. He entered through a door marked Employees Only, using a magnetic card to unlock it. It looked like a standard playing card, the 5 of clubs, and had been issued to him before the first time he'd been invited here. He turned left, walked down a long white hallway lit by bare fluorescents hanging in 8-foot strips from a high ceiling. At the end of the hall, he took a right and then pushed the button on an elevator set into the wall. When it arrived, another swipe of the card was necessary to open the door. Fredrick stepped inside and pressed the button for the 6th floor. A short ride and walk down a carpeted hallway this time, odd-numbered doors on the right, evens on the left. He came to room 636. Using the card again, he opened that door too. A man he knew as Nakamura looked up from a short, tan couch. It sat in front of a glass coffee table and faced a medium-sized television mounted to the wall. A quick glance around the room told him no one else was here. The shades covered the one large window, and cheap art hung on the walls. The wet bar stood slightly open, small bottles visible through the gap. "What's going on?" he asked, looking closer. His friend, who was originally from Japan, had a bandage around one knee, holding a bag of ice. His arm was in a sling, but looked like it should be in a cast. "I could ask you the same," Nakamura said. "I heard you've seen Jack and his friend." "I wouldn't say they are friends, although Burt, the one in the red getup I told you about, wants to be in Jack's circle, I'm sure." "Either way," Nakamura said. "Sit." Fredrick did, in a spacious recliner set at a 90-degree angle to the couch. "What happened to you?" "Jack happened to me. Him and his crazy dog, although I was able to control it briefly." "Control it? What do you mean? He didn't have a dog with him when I saw him." "He didn't? That is really odd. That dog is always with him. In some of my training, we were trained to talk to animals, to control them, or at least keep them from hurting us." "How does that work?" "Not sure I could even explain it if I had to. But I do have to tell you something before you make your report." "Okay." "The Queen is dead. Jack again. Technically, that means his debt to us is paid, but some of us aren't convinced we should just leave him alone. So I'm glad you spotted him." "Wait. The Queen of Diamonds is dead?" "It was Jack's only ticket to get free of Solitaire. Just no one thought he could actually pull it off. And he almost didn't. He tricked me." "I only understand a small part of that. But you're saying that scarred-up cripple I saw last night in Ace's club did this to you and killed the Queen?" "Yep. I'm telling you, he is way more dangerous than he looks. He took out another one of our operatives too, an excellent and experienced one. He wasn't even the first to try and take him out." "I don't understand." "Just tell me what you saw and heard." "Okay, first the scarred guy came in, headed for the highest stakes table after looking around. By the time he sat down, Red Hat, Burt? Yeah, Burt was inside and sat down at the same table. They both played well. After they'd been at it a while, a solitaire man came in. Whew. Didn't catch a name. Manny let him in. Maybe he bribed him. Maybe they just knew each other." "And?" "The solitaire guy, your guy, seemed more interested in Burt than he did in Jack. Jack intervened, and the pair cashed out and left. They talked briefly outside." "What about?" "No idea. We have cameras out there. No audio." "What was the outcome then?" "Jack left. Ace called Burt into the office for questioning, put him on the payroll watching Jack." "That's all?" "It's all I know for sure." "That is valuable information, Fredrick. Thank you. Do you think either man will come back to your club?" "It's hard to say." Fredrick kicked back in the chair, trying to get his large bulk comfortable. "Give me your best guess." Nakamura stayed in the same position he had been in, leg propped up, wounded arm resting on a couch pillow. He shifted a bit, and Fredrick saw a look of pain cross his face. "Best guess? I would say no, or at least not without an invitation. But Ace tasked Burt with following Jack, so Burt will have to report at some point." Probably by phone or email. Ace is highly in favor of the less contact the better, to keep his name distant from certain matters. That was one thing Fredrick had noticed as an employee of both Blackjack and Solitaire. Solitaire preferred out in the open, in-your-face tactics. They paid out politicians, cops, everyone who would look twice at their money. Blackjack operated in the background instead. The difference was a subtle one, but it made all the difference if you were a client who fell behind on your obligations. Solitaire bribed him openly, pushed him to use his position at the club to keep an eye on their competition. Ace ruled by fear, but a more refined one. If he were caught spying, Fredrick knew his end would be swift and secret. He would just disappear and never be heard from again. Solitaire liked to make offenders a public example. If you crossed either, you were dead. He did not know how Burt or Jack had survived this long. The only way to beat either organization was either to be more ruthless than they were, or to find a place to disappear where neither would find you. Both were nearly impossible tasks. "Are you full-time at the club?" Nakamura asked, interrupting his thoughts. "Yep, I am." Nakamura slid down and laid his head back on the top of the sofa. He winced visibly, and it was the first sign Fredrick saw that betrayed the pain he must be in. "We have to keep tabs on Jack," he said. "Burt is the key to that, and since he's already doing it for your employer, perhaps he wouldn't mind getting paid twice for the same work. Maybe he'd be open to trading for some credit in our establishments." Fredrick grimaced inside, but tried to hold his face steady. The proposal gave him déjà vu. Nakamura sighed. "Next time you see him, be that next week, in the next few days, or a few weeks from now, make him the offer. Give him my card, and contact me when it's done, okay?" "Of course," Fredrick said. "You'll find an extra 10,000 in credits if you convince him." "I appreciate that. That's all for now. Get out of here." Fredrick obeyed. He walked out into the mid-morning sun, not even stopping at the tables, although he had plenty of credits to spend at this point. He had a couple of hours before his shift at the club started, and thought he might be able to speed up hiring Burt and get some additional credits sooner. He was so close to buying his way out of his situations. Both of them. Using the 5 of Clubs keycard, he showed himself out of the casino the same way he'd entered. That's all for this chapter. Thanks for listening to The 5 of Clubs, Episode 9 in the Solitaire series. Next up in the series, The 4 of Hearts.